Hi, my name's Keith. In this video, I'm going to be giving an updated demo of my MIDI-CV-Arpeggiator Retrofit board, and I've recently installed this board in my ARP Odyssey and in my Paya 2700 modular. Now this video is going to be more of a tech-oriented video, and as a follow-up, there's even more information on my website. But if you're not interested in any of these tech details, there's a second video that's more music oriented, and you can click on the link to go to that video. If you're still with me, I'll start by opening up the Paya 2700 and showing you the installation details. So this is the back of the Paya 2700, and you can see the two MIDI jacks and two knobs, these potentiometers. These are the tuning controls, and they're part of the original synth, and there are also two mounting holes. And the MIDI-CV-Arpeggiator board is mounted right here on the back panel, and you'll see that in a moment. You may be wondering why there is a MIDI out jack. Well, it does not take what you play on the local keyboard and send it out, the MIDI out jack here. What it does is anything you play on the MIDI in jack will be echoed monophonically on the MIDI out jack. So anything on your MIDI controller will go through. But in addition to that, it also echoes the arpeggiator output and the mini sequencer output. So if you want to layer the sounds of this synthesizer with some other MIDI module, you can do it that way, or maybe send this off to another MIDI to CV converter to a different synth. You can also record the arpeggiator or sequencer sequences in your workstation if it can record MIDI. Let me flip the synth around and we'll look at the CV gate and filter cutoff jacks. So this is the panel to the left of the local keyboard, and you have the pitch bend knob and three output jacks. The one on the bottom outputs the pitch CV, the one on the top outputs a gate, and the one in the middle outputs a short trigger, a few milliseconds every time you depress a key. Now for the MIDI to CV retrofit, I decided to reuse these jacks. So the CV jack still will output the pitch CV from the MIDI to CV converter. The gate jack will output the gate, but the trigger jack, instead of the trigger, I used this to output the filter cutoff CV. You can still create this little pulse from the envelope follower module on the main synth, so that's not really a big deal. You may be wondering if these jacks output the controls from the local keyboard and the pitch bend knob, what happens when the voltages from the MIDI to CV converter board come out these jacks? Well, there's a little bit of a clever switching arrangement where the local CV and gates get looped through the converter board. And if you haven't sent any MIDI commands yet, these jacks will be live with the local keyboard CV and gate. But as soon as you send a MIDI command, it disconnects the local controls, and these voltages and gates will come directly from the MIDI to CV converter. And the reason why I did that is because if you leave the local controls connected at the same time, you can get pitch instabilities and little blips and bloops, and that's a real common problem with MIDI to CV conversions, where the local keyboard and the local controls cause voltage instabilities to the rest of the synthesizer. So it's best to disconnect them when you're under MIDI control. Also, you can see here there's a recessed switch. It's just a tack switch. You need something like a toothpick or a paper clip to push it, and there's an LED. And every time any MIDI command comes in or there's any MIDI messages, the LED will blink, so that's like a MIDI indicator. And what the button is for is to allow you to do a quick setup of common parameters that you want to change. For example, you can push this once and then press any key on a MIDI controller, and it'll change the MIDI channel 1 to 16 that the synth then responds to. Or you can push it twice and then turn any knob, and that becomes the filter cutoff knob. Let me open the synth up now, and I'll show you the board. So we're looking at the Paya from the top down, and here are the modules, and I'll open the back. I removed the screws earlier. Here is the MIDI to CV-Arpeggiator board, and as you can tell, it's mounted to the back panel with standoffs. And the two headers here, on the left there's the input and the right header is the output. I installed these Molex connectors. It just gives a more professional look, and also if I ever wanted to remove the back panel completely, I can simply disconnect the two Molex connectors. But you can solder directly to the board. That's possible as well. So on the left here, this is the input, and it's where it takes the power, which just comes from the power rails inside the synthesizer. The MIDI jacks connect to this header. The switch, the tactile switch on the front panel connects here, and also the local CV and gate, the inputs, the loop throughs that I was talking about before, they come in on this input header. And on the output header, it has the gate, the pitch CV, and also the auxiliary CV, or in this case for the installation, it's used to control the filter cutoff. Now, this is a good time to bring up the fact that the Paya 2700 uses the Hertz per volt standard for its pitch CV. So it's an exponential response curve for the pitch CV. And this board supports 1 volt per octave, Hertz per volt, like in this installation. It also supports the EMS standard, or the 0.32 volts per octave standard, and the Buchla or the EML standard, which is 1.2 volts per octave. And you probably can't see it in the video, but the surface mount DAC, which is right near the output connector, it's a 16-bit DAC. So you get really good accurate pitch response even in the Hertz per volt mode, and it also allows for a really well-defined pitch bends, and also slow and really smooth LFOs. So let me now look at the ARP Odyssey installation. This is the back of the ARP Odyssey, and as you can see, it's quite busy here with input and output jacks. Now this is an early Odyssey, so it originally didn't have the pitch, gate, and trigger CV input and output jacks, and I added these a few years ago. The models that came after this already had these factory installed. But here you can see the MIDI input and output jacks for my board, and also the switch, the recessed tactile switch here for the learn or the configuration button, and the MIDI and configuration status LED. Now I installed the switch and the LED on the back of this Odyssey because I wanted to keep the front original looking, as I'm sure you can appreciate. And you can't see the holes for the actual where I actually mounted the board because it's installed on the far side of the back panel. So let me flip it around, and I'll open it up and we'll look at the inside. This is the inside of the ARP Odyssey, and from my earlier videos you probably know that there are 3 main circuit boards, and they're connected by this flexible PCB, this spanning connector here. And there are headers and pins underneath to connect the 3 boards together to pass the control voltages between the boards. And I have to apologize in advance because the inside of this ARP Odyssey is a bit of a rat's nest. I use this for retrofit demos and trying different things, and for repair demos and trying different repairs. So there's a lot happening inside this Odyssey, and it's a bit of a mess. Sorry about that. In any case, here is my MIDI-CV-Arpeggiator board. And just like with the Paya 2700, I put some Molex connectors on the input and output headers. And just like the Paya 2700, the input connector goes to the power bus. It also has the MIDI input and output jacks connected to it. The button, the learn or the config button, and the local CV and gate from the keyboard, which are available just up near where the keyboard is. The best place to find out where all the patch points are for the CVs in the gate and the filter cutoff and all that is in the service manual. You can download it, and the ARP service manuals are great, and they show you pretty explicitly where you have to patch in all the signals. Here's the output, and of course it has the gate, pitch CV, and also the filter CV. Now the filter CV, instead of going to the patch points under this board, actually go directly to the filter module. And there are several different sources that feed the cutoff, different control voltages that feed the cutoff CV on this module, and they all terminate in a op-amp summing node. And if you've ever seen this, it's just a whole bunch of resistors from the different CVs, and they all go into the same node, and then they sum together at the op-amp. So at the end of this orange wire, which comes from the output header, you can see a little bit of shrink wrap here. I added resistor, and then I just soldered it directly to the input summing node on the op-amp to control the cutoff frequency, and that was it. Again, I just looked in the service manual to find out where all the patch points are. So enough of this inside all the synthesizers stuff. Let me put everything back together, and I'll plug things in, and I'll show you the features of the board. So here's my demo setup. This synthesizer up here is the ARP Odyssey, and it's been retrofitted with my MIDI-CV-Arpeggiator board. And down here is a 2-octave MIDI controller. And I've programmed all the knobs and the buttons and the faders to send the right commands, the MIDI commands, to the board to activate the various functions. Also, with a paint program, I've created these cardboard overlays to indicate the functions of all the buttons and knobs, because I actually couldn't remember what each of them did, and it also looks a little more professional. One thing I should explain before I go forwards is my board takes a signal from a 5-pin DIN MIDI connector. That's the style, you know, the round style with the 5 pins. Some people may recognize this MIDI controller as being a USB controller. Well, I have a USB host to 5-pin MIDI adapter box. It's off camera, you can't see it. So it converts the output of this MIDI controller to 5-pin DIN style MIDI. I just wanted to be clear that that's the signal that the board takes. Now, the general functionality of the board is there, what you would expect. So you have pitch control, pitch bend, modulation. The modulation uses the built-in LFO, so it's not using the LFO on the Odyssey. And there's real-time control over the filter with this rotary knob on the controller. You can also map the filter to velocity on the keyboard. And when I show the Paya 2700, I'll show you how you can do that. Also, there's a portamento with real-time control over the speed. There's 2 modes of portamento. There's constant rate and constant time. And normally you would map a button to toggle between the two, but I ran out of buttons, so this is just the constant rate style portamento. So let me go back to the LFO. So the controls for the LFO are here. This fader is mapped to select the different shapes. There's also a speed control, a phase control, and also you can go between a free-running LFO or an LFO that restarts whenever you push the key down or have key sync. So let me turn the LFO way down so you can hear it modulating the pitch. Right now it's on the triangle wave. There's also saw. Inverted saw. And then there's 2 user-definable waves, and those can be updated via sysx. The default one for user 1 is a sine wave, so not too exciting. The second one is a stepped wave that forms a triad if you have the pitch bend all the way up and you have it set to 1 octave modulation. So you can use it to create, you know, old-style video game sounds, or you can program your own shape into there. And then there's a square wave. use that to create old school style octave jumps. And then there's also 40, 30, 20, and 10% pulses and random, which is like having a built-in sample and hold. So I'll go back to the triangle wave there. So right now the LFO is set at free run, so it doesn't matter when you push the key down, the LFO is just somewhere in the wave shape. You don't know exactly where it is, but you can also change it to key sync. So every time you push the key down, the LFO starts at the same position in the wave. So here I have it on triangle wave, so every time I press the key, if key sync is on, you hear it go up. I can change the phase of the LFO if I want to, instead of having the upward sweeping part of the ramp, if I want the downward sweeping part, I just change the phase. You can hear it going down. And in addition to key sync in the phase, the LFO can also modulate the filter. So this control can switch the modulation of the filter. There we go. And this is where the phase control and key sync can be really useful, because you can use it to open or close the filter to give that nice punchy filter effect every time you hit the key down. So whenever I'll play with the phase until I find the... There we go. So I have the phase set on a downward slope, so it's closing the filter just after I push the key. So you get that nice effect. Okay, now let's go on to the arpeggiator and the mini sequencer. The controls for the arpeggiator are speed control, and it's mapped to this knob here. The gate control, which changes the length of the note or the width of the gate for each step. This arpeggiator has a dedicated on and off button to turn the feature on and off. And the mini sequencer has a record and a play button. So let's turn the arpeggiator on, and then I'll just play a chord. And you can hear it doing what you would expect it to do. And you can change the chord in real time. Now if I just play a chord, I have to keep it down, but if I hold the sustain pedal at the same time, it latches the chord in place, and then I can play around with other functions like the speed control, the gate, filter, or even add portamento. So all of the real-time controls are live, so everything is always live, all at the same time. There are 8 different arpeggiator patterns, so you just heard up, and they're numbered 1 through 8. So there's up, number 2 is down, 3 is up, down, 4 is down, up, 5 is up, down, repeating the notes at the end, 6 is down, up, repeating the notes at the end, 7 is random, and 8 is custom, which is the custom pattern is actually the mini sequencer. And the way you change the pattern is you send a MIDI program control message. These are actually the bank and patch numbers that you would send to change the sound on a MIDI sound module. With my board, the bank number is the pattern number, and the patch number is how many octaves you want to play it through. So I'm going to play a chord here, and on this keyboard, to change patch and bank numbers, you use these 2 buttons here. So let me just kind of cycle through them. So I'll just increase the number of octaves, and now I'll change the pattern to down, and I'll increase the number of octaves so you can hear it going down, and then I can do the down up, and then I can change to up down over a series of octaves, portamento, and then I'll go way up to pattern 7, which is random. So you get the idea. Now let me talk about the mini sequencer. Operating the mini sequencer is pretty easy. You push the record button and then you just play in the notes of your sequence. You can enter up to 32 notes. If you want to enter a rest, you just push the sustain pedal, then you press play. Now when I press a key, it'll repeat that sequence relative to middle C. So I can play it in real time, change the speed, play around with the filter and everything, add portamento, and I can transpose it. You may be wondering why I have a Volca Beats here off to the side. Well, the arpeggiator, the sequencer, and the LFO on my board can all sync to MIDI beat clock. So I'm going to use the Volca Beats to create MIDI clock and then sync everything together. Now, I have to do a little aside again. I added a MIDI out port to this Volca Beats. Normally, it doesn't have a MIDI out port, so you can't generate MIDI beat clock from it, and it's a retrofit that you have to do. But any MIDI drum machine or a sequencer that generates MIDI clock can be used to synchronize to my board. So I'll press play on the Volca Beats. And then I'll turn on the sync function. I map this button to send a command to the board to turn sync on, and then I'll just play the same sequence I was playing a moment ago. And you can tell that it's synced up with the Volca. And I can change the speed, and you can see everything stays in sync. And I can control the filter and the portamento, and all of the other real-time controls just like before, the gate. There's one thing I should mention about the speed control. When you're not synced to MIDI beat clock, the speed control just does what you would expect it to. However, when you're synced to MIDI, the speed control determines which beat to sync to. So quarter notes, eighth note triplets, 16th notes, whatever. And you can choose between 4 whole notes all the way up to 32nd note triplets. So let me play the sequence again, and I'll fiddle around with the speed sync knob, and you'll see how it synchronizes to the different note values. So that's 16th notes, that's quarter notes, I think that's 8th note triplets, that's straight eighths, and back to 16ths. So I switched over to the Pia 2700. And it's got a really raw sound. And what I'm going to demonstrate here is the use of the configuration button and the status LED. So what I'll do is I'll take the filter control, which is currently mapped to this knob, and I'm going to change it to the velocity of the MIDI controller, so the key down velocity. And basically what you do is you look up the parameter number for the filter, and you push the button the right number of times, and then you push keys or twiddle a knob, and then the mapping for that control changes. Now, even though I designed this board, I don't have all of the parameter numbers in my head, so on my website I have a downloadable postcard that has a cheat sheet. And here it says that the filter control is config number 2. So I take a toothpick or a paper clip or something, and I push the button twice, and you can see the LED starts blinking, and now I just twiddle a knob or push a key, and that control will move to whatever I press. So for velocity, you just hit any key. Now, rather than the knob, which isn't working anymore, it's the velocity of the key. So if I press it lightly, the filter is closed, and then as I have higher velocity or press the key harder, the filter opens opens up, and then as I go softer, the filter closes again. So it gives a nice velocity sensitivity feel to this keyboard, which is what the original designer, who was John Simonton of Paya, he probably wouldn't have anticipated velocity sensitivity on Paya 2700, but there you go. Now let me change the control back to the knob, so I know it's parameter 2. So I press the button twice, the LED blinks, I twiddle the knob, and now we're back to control with the knob. Anybody that's owned one of these early Paya synths might have noticed that I have it uncharacteristically in tune. In fact, I have it in tune over 5 octaves, and I'll show you that. I just love the filter on this thing. And that's surprising because the design of the oscillator on the original synth was really only meant to be in tune over 2 or 3 octaves. And to compensate for the deficiencies in the oscillator, there is a trim pot or a tuning control under every single key. So the idea was you were supposed to tune every single key individually, and then it didn't really matter about the linearity of your oscillator. Now, with my board, in addition to picking one of the standard curves, which is 1 volt per octave, the Buchla or EML standard of 1.2 volts per octave, the EMS standard of 0.32 volts per octave, or hertz per volt, which is this synthesizer here. There's another special mode, and it's the custom tuning table mode, and it allows you to define the control voltage for every single semitone over the 5 octave range, and then it interpolates between the notes, so pitch bend and the modulation control of the pitch still sounds correct. So to get into that mode, you look up the parameter on your handy dandy cheat sheet, and here it says custom tuning setup is parameter 6. So I hit the button 6 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I can see the LED blinking in a specific pattern that indicates 6. And how this works is you push any key that you're interested in changing the pitch of, like say I think this is too sharp. There are 2 controls. It's the LFO speed and the arpeggiator speed, and they're mapped to coarse and fine tune of the pitch. So there we go. You see I can change the pitch of this tune. Say I make it really sharp, and I can make it really flat. And that's the fine control. The coarse control allows you to go completely out of whack. See? There. So let me try to get it back. That's about where it should be. Yeah, that's pretty good. So what you can do is you can go over all 5 octaves of the keyboard and tweak the tuning to be exactly in tune. And a side effect of this is you can also program microtonal scales or any other type of scale on the keyboard. So if you want to play with some experimental microtonal or remapping of notes on the keyboard, you can do that. Now normally you wouldn't go through this big bother of tuning each of the individual semitones over 5 octaves unless you had a really difficult to tune synth like this Paya 2700. The ARP Odyssey that I was showing before, for that one, I just picked the default 1 volt per octave curve, and I didn't have to do anything, and everything was in tune. Well, that's it for this tech demo. As I mentioned at the beginning, there's a second video that's more music-oriented that shows the board in action. And you can always go to my website to get more information. Thanks for watching.